You are listening to The Mystical Positivist. I'm your host, Stuart Goodnick. Joining me is co-host Rob Schmidt. This week on the show, we converse by telephone with Shawinigan Ungaya, a.k.a. Guillaume Gauthier, founder and director of the Sanctuary Healing Center in the Catskill Mountains, where he offers various forms of healing modalities, including shamanic, energy, and sound healing, plus plant and herb therapies, as well as an awakened leadership course.
We'll get started with that show after a short musical break. Musical interludes on this show are from a CD called The Lute in Dance and Dream, Masterpieces for Lute from the 16th to the 18th centuries, performed by Lutz Kirchhoff on Renaissance and Baroque lutes. This piece is a Fantasia by Francesco Canova di Milano.
This is The Mystical Positivist, a radio show dedicated to the application of reason in the pursuit of spiritual practice and development. It consists of commentary, book reviews, interviews, and discussion in and around the local and larger spiritual community. The thesis of the show is that rationality is in no way the antithesis of deep mystical experience. In fact, we assert that it is a necessary ally. I'm your host, Stuart Goodnick. Joining me is co-host Rob Schmidt, director of Tayu Meditation Center and co-founder with myself and Jim Wilson of Many Rivers Books and Tea in Sebastopol.
Great to be here.
This week on the show, we converse by telephone with Shawinigan Ungaya, a.k.a. Guillaume Gauthier, shamanic healer and founder of the Sanctuary Healing Center in the Catskill Mountains of New York. After a career that scaled the heights of corporate success as a CEO of global companies, Guillaume reached a turning point in his life. Material success and trappings had not necessarily made him really happy or fulfilled. He had the big degree, big job, and success that most people aspire for, but he was not happy. Guillaume decided to completely change his life and embarked on a journey of self-exploration and meditation that took him from working with Mother Teresa's mission in India to the jungles of Peru in search of finding meaning in life and fulfillment beyond the material demands of society today. Through seeking to transform his own life to live with a higher purpose, Guillaume made a life-changing commitment to helping others in their search for peace, harmony, and happiness. During his last 10 years of transformative journeys across Asia and South America, Guillaume had rare opportunities to study and meditate with master healers and teachers of all faiths. He is trained in shamanism, plant medicine, medical Reiki, Sufi healing, sound healing, meditation, and herbalism. In 2015, Guillaume opened the Sanctuary Healing Center on his property in the Catskills, where he does in-depth work with clients, hosts workshops, and cultivates the land for organic vegetable farming, plant medicine, and honeybees. Born and educated in France, Guillaume also holds a Ph.D. in veterinary science and surgery from Maison-Alfort, France. Guillaume resides at the sanctuary in the Catskills and travels to New York City and all over the world for his work. Shawinigan Ungaya, Guillaume Gautreau, welcome to the Mystical Positivist.
Thank you.
Well, great to have you on, and we'll begin with the question we always give to or ask of guests in our first conversation with them, and that is to invite you to cast your memory back to childhood and youth, and tell us about any experiences that pop into your head that you would be able to say were harbingers or precursors or pointed to the direction that your work has taken, in your case, in the last 10 or more years.
Yeah, it's always interesting to look back. I was, thinking about it, and I think the main thing, that keeps coming up is that connection to nature. For me, that was always very strong when I was little. My parents always found me, they say always my eyes either on the ground or up in the sky. So I was never really looking straight in front of me. So I was always looking at insects or marks of animals on, in the forest, or looking at the stars and what's beyond and the mystery of it.
Where in France were you able to look at the stars, as opposed to?
I was living 2 hours north of Paris. So in a small town, and my parents, we would live on the edge of the town, basically on the forest, on the edge of it. So we always, spend a lot of time there.
Wonderful. Well, so you obviously, at least from the biography that Stuart just read, you clearly, after that initial interest in nature, you got involved in the material world and the business world. How did that, just briefly, how did that happen, and then how did you decide to exit that?
Well, I went to a veterinary school when I get my degree, my PhD, and in fact, right at the end of the studies, which was, around seven years, I decided, somehow I felt like I didn't want to be opening a clinic. I specialized in working with farm animals as a surgeon at the time. And I realized, I think I want to live in different place in my life. And if I open a clinic, I'm going to live in one place. And also I felt there was something else calling me. And I started my first company when I was at school as a student. And I was 20 or 30 people working in it by the end of my study.
Wow.
And the CEO of a pet food company came to see me. I think it was a week before the end of my whole study. And he said, "Hey, Guillaume, why don't you come and join us? Why don't you come work for us? I think that would be great." And I didn't really think too much about it, and I just went to work in the corporate sector literally a week after I left the school. And all my friends were, going to work at other clinics and opening clinics. And me, I went, on that work directly into the corporate sector. So I kind of made the shift, pretty quickly without too much questioning, I would think.
But you were still using your veterinary knowledge, I assume.
Yeah, in some ways, because I was basically in charge of big sectors for that company in the north of France, and my clients were vets, so I would be dealing with them for commercial matters and marketing matters. I would visit veterinary clinics 3 or 4 days a week. So I would still be in that environment, definitely, but it was more commercial and marketing jobs that, it was about nutrition too, because I was, working with quite high-end pet food, but it was not directly related to most of the things that I learned at school, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So how did you find that experience, and what was the growing pressure that arose within you to find something that ultimately was more meaningful for you?
Well, I didn't question it at the time. I really loved it, to be honest, because my friend that was out of school were struggling, and they had to do, overnight shift and weekend works, and, they were working for other clinics, not getting very well paid. And, I was having a salary, I was having a car, and the company was taking care of me. And so for many years, I stayed in the corporate sectors because I became quite good at what I was doing. I went for different companies. I worked for Nestle, and then I went to work in the luxury industry. And it's really after 10 years working in the luxury industry that I started to realize that I was not really happy. I was really good at what I was doing. I was successful. I was making money, but my life was not fulfilling somehow. There was something else calling me. And I could not really put a finger on what was wrong because I did everything I was told to do. The big school and getting a nice job and making money and buying a house and just doing all those things. But I had all of that. And somehow for me, it was like, that's not it. I don't know what it is, but this is not going to fulfill me. So that's when the questioning started. And then I opened my own business, so I went on an entrepreneur path where also here in the U.S., in New York, where I was living at the time, and became also the same thing. My company became really big with, close to 200 employees and within a few years. And that's when the pressure, I think, the distortion between the outer world, my successful outer world, and what I could maybe a depression or the unhappiness of my inner world was so apart from each other. It was like this massive stretch. There was such a difference between who I was playing during the day and what I was feeling inside. Mm-hmm. And that's really when I decided to really quit everything and go on a big different journey.
Got it. Before we get into that different journey, I just want to ask if when you were growing up north of Paris, did you have any kind of interaction with any religious or spiritual traditions at all in your growing up? I mean, you mentioned your fascination with and connection with nature as a child, but
yes.
But go ahead.
But my family was atheist, so I was not raised. I mean, France is a Christian country. Most people are Christians over there, but my parents were not. And, I never went to church or things like that. Mm-hmm. But I was always attracted to religion, very young age. My mother remembered that I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And, in France, we have all those beautiful old monasteries and abbayes and churches. My parents would love for us to go visit those old places. Mm-hmm. And I always felt very connected there. She told me one day that we were in that monastery that, that was not in activity anymore, but I would walk inside around where the monks were walking. I didn't know that, but I was doing that round circles all around a certain spot in the garden. And the person that was making the visit told us, that he's doing like the monk used to do. And I think I was 5 at the time. I don't remember it, but I clearly remember that connection that was really strong my whole childhood and, never left me. It has just been growing my whole life.
Got it. So then, returning to the point in the story I diverted you from for a moment, when you'd reached this disconnect between the aspiration that you had and that I assume was not yet narrowed down, but
not at all.
but what you were actually doing, successfully in the world. So how did you negotiate not knowing what direction to turn to fulfill your aspirations?
Well, in short, I would say it was really an act of faith. That's really what it was when I look back now. But there was clearly not a comfortable place to be for me at the time because I was definitely not comfortable with not knowing. Having a scientific background and being raised, a certain way where you need to know everything and figure out things before you take decisions, and that was creating my whole suffering because obviously I could not see what was next. But in parallel to that, at the same time, my suffering was growing, and at some point it becomes so intense And I was on a spiritual path, meaning that I had teachers, I was starting to learn meditations, and I was going to retreats. So that was going on in the background and increasing that suffering in some way, but also increasing my capacity to hold more space for that suffering and for a way to look at it, to see what is going on there.
What kind of traditions were you exploring at that time?
Say that again, sorry?
Well, what kind of traditions were you exploring at that time?
I was working with a teacher in New York, which was an Advaita Vedanta teacher, so Indian scriptures, traditional Indian scriptures, and with someone that was in the lineage of Chogyam Trungpa, so crazy wisdom. So two very different lineages, but in some ways, I really loved it. I love the difference between the two of it. Yeah.
Got it. So, so you were doing that, though. I mean, we're still in the period, or you were beginning to do that towards the end of the period of your engagement with the business world in the way that you described, right?
Yes. And I started to work with plant medicine. I started to go work with shamans in Peru. And it was, I would say probably 4 or 5 years before I left everything. So I already had a start to a feeling and experience of what this world is about. And that's what basically grew in the background the most. And that's what really became what I'm the most connected to today, but still very connected to all the different religions also.
So I'm interested about that transition in, working in, I presume you were in New York City when you're at this point doing your corporate work, and being exposed to plant medicine is an interesting difference. I mean, from the Trungpa tradition or the Shambhala tradition and the Advaita Vedanta. I'm interested. How did you get connected with that, and what kind of resources did you find available in terms of either teachers or places to go?
I mean, it's true that the tools are very different, but I would say the aim, which is liberation from suffering, which is opening to higher level of consciousness or different level of consciousness, are the same. There's still this aim of liberation of the human condition in some ways. So, and I could see that already at the time. I remember that I was like, oh, all those are saying the same thing. They're just using different words and different tools. So a friend of mine at the time had experience with plant medicine and mentioned it to me. I really never heard about it before. And he said, oh, there is that person that's coming and that does this work. Would you like to meet him? And I went on this ceremony, and, I was so moved by it. It was difficult. It was very intense, but it was also so beautiful. And I felt, for a moment, there was a moment in it, like sometimes you have that experience in meditation or other spiritual work, but almost touching at a glimpse of the universe, a glimpse of that totality, that love that's behind everything. And that was such a profound experience that it became kind of my rope through the dark nights, through the suffering, through the unknowing, like you mentioned, and going through it, say, well, I might not understand things very quickly. I might not find my path very quickly, but there's so much to discover there. There's something really beautiful. I could feel that, and I want to pursue that. Something was telling me, just go for it. Just trust it.
Well, it's interesting. You just mentioned, compared this to you said sometimes in meditation. So I'm wondering if at that time you already had a fairly deep or sophisticated meditation practice when you found yourself so touched personally in this other tradition?
Yes, I did. I was already probably 3 or 4 years already as a deep doing meditation. I was starting to teach meditation in New York.
Which a Tibetan form or
more the Hindu tradition, more the Hindu tradition, and I already had experience of kind of being completely dissolved, that experience of expansion, that experience of love in some of my meditation practice. And I knew, I didn't have to hold to that. It was not that I was aiming for that, but coming back from it and seeing how I was the days after, the weeks after those experiences, and see how my language was changing, how my behavior was changing, my relation with my emotion was changing. I was like, wow, I feel so much better than the other way of being. And so that I knew there was something else. I could not tell what it was, and I really didn't know. I mean, if you tell me that I will be doing what I'm doing today, if you told me that 10 years ago, I would have probably laughed. It's crazy.
So
but, yeah.
Well, I'm intrigued by you say your language changed. I mean, clearly you're not talking about French to English. Your English is really good.
Thank you.
But can you expand on that by telling us what how you experienced the way you spoke? I assume that's what you mean. How that shifted for you.
Well, I remember clearly there was a moment in my life where I could see that most of my words, my language was coming down from my head into my throat, and that's what I was talking. That's what I was saying.
Okay.
And then one day something dropped. And like my face, I thought my face and my belief was very in my head. It was probably in my heart too already, but it was very heady. But it dropped in my heart. It dropped down. It dropped down into my chest. I remember the physicality of it, the feeling that some of my words, like if I could get focused, if I would just drop in, and I would speak from that place, it would be a voice that comes more from my abdomen, my heart, and the way up through my throat. There was this clear moment seeing the difference in terms of tone and the difference in terms of wisdom, I would say, and validation needed. Like when I was talking as a CEO or as a business person, there was always this need for validation. There was something about to prove someone about me being right and saying that or doing this. Then it was something that was much deeper about my own experience, what I felt. It was more about emotion and feelings than thinking.
That's very interesting. I have a sort of a side question related to that, in that while you had this experience and you were still working in the corporate world, did you find yourself experimenting with what happens in that environment if you actually allow the words to drop down or to come from a deeper place within yourself?
Yes, I think there was two aspects to it. The first one is that it could clearly bring a deeper connection with others, a different level of listening that could happen, listening to each other and being present, basically. But also it was triggering for sometimes for other people, because it's almost like people want to stay in that heady space and that, that unhealthy ego space, I would say, in some ways, where if you come with certain words, sometimes you have to be very careful, not create allergies. My teachers always say, no, don't use allergic words. So I was starting to use some of that vocabulary, some different definitions. Like, for example, my definition of happiness, would have been very different 10 years ago than it is today. But if you talk to people sometimes that have not yet along on that path, that have maybe not got through the transformation, people can hear really. They don't really believe that it's not about money or about the corporate letters, or it's not about, all those things. How big is your title on your business card? And so it was a process, I would say, to kind of build that vocabulary, which was basically building my inner container, that was holding that vocabulary. And also, the painful process of shedding all my belief system and my ego and all the things that I was and that keep me safe, or I felt was keeping me safe. And it felt very unsafe, to come out of that. It felt very like life and death, like I was dying to a process, but who was going to be born? And also a lot of my networks, a lot of my friends, I would say, or connection at the time were people in that world. And I knew and I saw that a lot of that might be lost in the process. I had to change, find a new tribe, My tribe was going to shift. Some people might be there, but a lot of them are not going to be along the way. And it was painful sometimes, to those people I've known for a very long time.
So at this point then, there came the decision to completely walk away from that world. So tell us a little bit about that and about the world that you walked into.
Yes, that was at the kind of a peak event of my career at the time. I was nominated for the Entrepreneur of the Year award for my company that I, launched in New York with Christophe, my business partner at the time, and so we were nominated for that award, which it's a pretty big deal in the business world. And I was in Times Square, this private event for this award ceremony, and there was, 1,000 people in the room, and CEOs and big companies and entrepreneurs, and I had to go on stage, to talk and to be present for the opening of the award, and, we were nominated, so there was all 4 or 5 nominated people with me and that. And when I walked on stage at that moment, and I remember very clearly looking at the whole room, and everybody with big eyes open wanted to be us, wanted to be me, wanted to be on stage, wanted to be that person next year. And it was at a time where I was in profound inner suffering. My relationship was not well at all. I was medicating myself. There was a lot of things going on in my life. I was not healthy at all. And I saw the lie that I was, the walking lie, the big smile, the nice tie, the nice suit. But the truth that I knew that I could not hide anymore about not believing in what I was going to talk about. And basically something just shattered. Something shattered. Something happened that day. And I remember leaving that evening and spending almost the whole night up thinking, I can't do this anymore. And very quickly, a few weeks later, decided that I had to leave all of that. I could not wait anymore to find out, because I was trying to find out, what is it? What am I supposed to do? It's one thing to love nature, to love, shamanic work, to love spirituality and religion, but what do I want to do? What do I do with that? How do I sustain myself? I had all those questions, And it was a leap of faith. It was big enough inside of me, that belief about that presence, but, something bigger than me, that I knew I will be held. Something was going to carry me to that process. And that teacher that was going to carry me was inside myself, was, beyond myself. It was something much bigger. And that was going to be something beautiful. But it went to, a lot of pain and fears, and it was not like just, okay, let's go, let's take a leap of faith. But it was daunting in many ways.
So you're at this point of transition, and what do you actually do in the world? Where do you take your body? Where do you move? What happens next?
So I decided to basically quit everything. My company, it was a process because, I was running a big company and there was a lot of money behind, so it took, many months to get there. Mm-hmm. But also my relationship, my apartment in New York, everything I had basically in my life, my car, everything, just let go of everything. Mm. And I remember packing a big backpack, putting all what I was bringing with me, put on my bed basically. There was like 40 or 50 things that I was going to bring with me that I thought I would need on that journey. I remember taking a photo of it at the time and left with that backpack basically, and took a one-way ticket to India, but not to go in an ashram or to go, to see a teacher, but to go to volunteer at Mother Teresa in Kolkata. Mm. And it was based on one of the teacher I was working with at the time, where I was asking him, I said, I really need a change. I want to go pray somewhere or meditate, and I want to go in an ashram for that. And he said, don't go in an ashram, and go taking care of the poorest of the poor, go serve, go do something that's not about you, and then you'll find yourself in that process. And he really struck me when he said that. Oh, yeah, it has not to be about me. And so I thought about Mother Teresa somehow, and one of my friends walked there many years before, took a one-way ticket, get in Kolkata at the center, one of the center there at Mother Teresa, and just knocked at the door and say, here I am. And they asked me how long I was here for, and I said, I don't know, maybe one day, maybe 1 year, maybe more, and started working with dying people the day after in the street of Kolkata and in the hospital.
How did that touch your heart?
Well, that completely shifted everything. Because for once, I was not worried. For once, I was not questioning anything. It was a very funny thing. I was so present by taking care. So I was working with, in the first place, Mother Teresa opened when she started, which is the place where basically you pick up people that are dying in the street or about to die, and you bring them in and you wash them, and you give them food, and you give them a nice bed so they can die with dignity and not in the street. And I was taking care of those men, so because I was a man, so I was in the men's side of the hospital, and that's what I would do. I would start doing those things, and I was so touched by those men, by their presence, and I was almost like taking care of babies in some ways, because those men didn't had anybody ever that took care of them, and I was the only reason they might stay alive, by feeding them, by taking care of them. I didn't speak their language, but I have to be there for them.
So I can understand how that would be, that would rip open some things that wouldn't ordinarily get touched. What happened after that?
Well, as I was there, and it's funny because, I was in a Hindu country. I was in India, and I was surrounded by, Hindu and Buddhist mainly. But I was in a Christian place, Mother Teresa. And one day, so every morning and every evening, before work and after work, I would go to the Mass with all the sisters that run the centers. And it would be kind of my anchor for the day. It would give me strength for the day, just sitting there and listening to the sister on their knees, praying and singing for an hour. And I would go, I would make the effort to just go there and spend an hour in my meditation and listening to the chants and all of that. And during that time, I think it was not a long time I was there. It was probably a week or two after I arrived. I had one of my first really profound, I would say, mystical experience of direct communication with God. That's the best way I can describe it. I never really talked too much about it, because it's kind of a very personal experience, but let's say I had this conversation that went on for a few days. Almost you could say like a voice in your head, but a very clear conversation. And it was with Christ, that was on that cross on the wall, which was very weird to me because I didn't have any connection to it. I didn't have special connection to it because I was not raised that way. But there was that discussion going on. And I was basically told, this is what you need to do. The first thing that was asking me was to resolve all the unresolved relationship pain that I was carrying with me. And so one of the first messages was you need to reach out to that person that you hurt. And it was a person I haven't heard for 10 years. I haven't been in touch for 10 years. It was, much earlier in my life that this happened. And I remember coming out of that Mass being very shaken by it, but at the same time not shaken, like almost it was normal. It was this very weird feeling. And opening my phone and having a message from that person on my phone that I haven't heard from in 10 years. And then I turned around and I looked at, that man on that cross there, and I was like, what is going on? And I thought I was really going crazy. And he just laughed. That's what I saw or felt or heard. He was just laughing. And that was the beginning, basically, of things happening really deeply to me and starting touching me in depth. And then those voices went off a few days later, 4 or 5 days later. But a lot happened in that process. And that's when my faith dropped down. I was feeling it alive in my heart. Like I knew there was something beyond what I could see. There was a higher consciousness, something bigger that I could hold on to, and that could be my teacher, that could be my guide. And he related to me a lot to my plant medicine experience, where I could feel and hear that voice in nature, through trees or plants or rivers or mountains. And so it was this familiar voice, very ancient, very wise, almost like a grandmother or grandfather, but had wisdom that I didn't remember or didn't know. And I was so clear. It was so precise. I could not listen, basically. So I started listening.
And where did that listening take you next? Did you stay in Kolkata, or did you ultimately journey elsewhere?
Yeah, so I spent a few months in Kolkata, and then I spent a whole year abroad in total, but in Kolkata I spent only a few months, and then I started to do other volunteering missions, different parts of India, and also Sri Lanka, Nepal, and the Philippines, and a few other countries. I ended up in Israel at the end. That's where I finished my trip. And I was mixing 2 weeks to a month of volunteering with 2 weeks or 3 weeks of meditation, prayer, teaching practice with different sage masters, teachers all around. So I went, to Bodh Gaya and Varanasi in India. So some of, the most sacred place in India. And I did the same thing in Nepal and Sri Lanka, but always with making sure that I balance my time, at least half of it for volunteering, for being engaged, in service. And I think that's what shifted the most my whole work, obviously, because there was this spiritual experience going on in the background. There was this trying to hear that voice or to connect with that voice, to humble myself in some way so I could get out of the way and connect to that deeper wisdom inside of me. And also making sure I don't stay in my head and I don't just sit there in meditation for a year, but I serve, that I help. And that kind of birthed a very different person, because I was not much in who I was before.
And so out of that experience of being on the road, at what point did you return to the U.S. and begin to offer more of this teaching and offer a practice to other people?
Well, when I came back, first there was a question, do I come back? Do I come back to the U.S.? Do I stay here? Do I go somewhere else? Do I go back to France? I was in the U.S. for 10 years at that time already. And I started, really praying and meditating about it, and really what I was feeling is like, yeah, that's where you need it. That's where you can serve. That's where you have connection and people, and so I decided to come back, but I still didn't know at all that I was going to do what I'm doing today. And so I started diving deeper in the plant medicine work, in the shamanic work, in Reiki and a few other practices, starting offering sound healing that I learned when I was in India, Reiki, because I trained as a Reiki master when I was in India too during that year. So I started offering some of those sessions when I was back and diving deeper in the plant medicine world, going to Peru, once or twice a year, going to Brazil. And that's what basically really opened the most. That's what started to really open and shifted my path in profound ways, in the last 6-7 years.
So well, I appreciate that. It's a interesting journey, and I would like to start to maybe talk a little more specifically about some of the practices that you've described. In particular, I'm interested in what you describe about healing and the utilization of healing, that putting yourself in that position, engaged with other people instead of completely engaged in some sort of interior practice, you felt was a critical and as important, if not more important, than the interior practices that you had been introduced to. And so,
yeah.
Good.
It's a very good question, and it's always kind of it's very dualistic. There's two types of answer really. Obviously it's needed. We need that inner work, and there's no way we can do soul work, going deep down, see what's going on, without spending some time alone and some time in deep practices. But at the same time, I think especially for the Western mind and the way we've been educated, and all the shadows or layers or armors and trauma that's in the way, we can become self-centered a little bit in this, or lost in it. Self-centered, would be, sometimes a little bit bad when we hear that, but just lost in it. That we just spend so much time doing that we really forgot why we're here, which is really it's not about us really. It's really about others. It's really about service. Others being, it could be the planet and nature. It can be also people or animals, or whatever calls you. And sometimes, you can get very attached to a practice and very tight to that practice. Plus the practice, already is only good for what you're going to do with it in real life with it. True yoga is already the yoga of life. Once you're in a relationship with someone, meditation is how you're going to react if you're triggered by someone that's telling you something that's triggering you. That's when your practice is useful. It's easy to not be triggered. If you spend a year in meditation in an ashram, it's easier, let's say. It's a bit different once you have to be confronted with a partner that's difficult, or your own parents, whatever is going on in your life. That's really where you see how strong is your practice. And that's when you practice. That's when you can practice your breathing, your center, your still staying connected, staying in your heart, and still being engaged with people, not pushing away, not running away, and all of that. And so to me, I think that was key, because that allowed me, by kind of alternating those two different things, to build a strong practice, but also to see its impact on my capacity to hold space, to hold people in their own trauma, because I hold myself in my trauma, in my pain, in my despair, in my hopelessness, and Shogram Trungpa talks a lot about that, and it was really triggering to me to read that things were hopeless, when I was reading teaching at some point. But I kind of understood that later on, understanding that, we have this amazing capacity as humans to hold opposite, to hold things sometimes we cannot reconcile, to hold sometimes deep, deep pain and grief, and also joy and gratitude to be alive when we wake up in the morning. And my life was always about extreme, one way or another, fully on one side or fully on the other side. And that practice, and really it's what nature is showing us in shamanic work, is that capacity to hold opposites, life and death, in front of your eyes when you look carefully at nature at all times. It's joy and pain. It's all of that is there. And that, for me, is being human. It's being able to be in that center by feeling, not by disengaging, not by bypassing. That's also the risk sometimes with deep practice. We can even bypass certain feelings, just being, kind of checking out in meditation.
Right.
We just don't want the pain, and we just meditate. So we come back from a hard work, we just want not to feel. And, some people take a glass of wine and some people meditate. If you do it to numb the pain or bypass the pain, I don't know which one is better. Probably meditation is better, but at the end of the day, which one really, when are you going to do the deep healing work, which is to feel, to be able to hold that thing, to feel it, to be present with it. And that takes time, to be honest, it takes a lot of time to be able to do that. And falling again, and I'm still on that path, still falling and climbing again, every time I fall.
Got it.
What you were just saying reminds me of something I heard you. I thought I heard you say earlier in the show, which was sort of linking healing and liberation. That is the kind of liberation that, like Buddhism, might speak of, and so. You just I think introduced trauma for the first time, the word trauma, into the conversation a few minutes ago, and I know from some of the emails we shared before this interview that's a big area for you. But But if if one speaks about trauma, the healing is obviously related to that. But before we get into the trauma specifically, I'm wondering if is there any other way that you would link these two, because I think this is an interesting area now. In California, we see lots of teachers who are speaking about healing and the importance of healing, individual healing, collective healing, planetary healing, etc. And they don't necessarily link that to the sort of some of the classic descriptions of liberation from Buddhists and other traditions. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about that linkage.
Yes, I mean I'm not a Buddhist practitioner, so I cannot talk much about that. But I study a little bit, but to me, very often, at least in the spiritual community, when people sometimes is it maybe not so deep yet in the path, or not study a lot yet, liberation is almost like this nirvana. So it's that place almost of no suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But it's seen as a place of no suffering because basically I'm just in pure bliss. There's no more pain. There's none of that anymore. And that's good to have. There's a space of liberation. I can just be present, and be in that state. But for me, the truth as human beings, however advanced we are with our practices and however type of practice we're doing, the path of liberation is a path of being able to feel everything and still be able to be emotionally engaged and connected with our heart, which allows us to be emotionally engaged and connected with others. Which means that it doesn't mean I don't use the word pain. There's no more pain. No, it can be pain. We can be very liberated and still experience a feeling of deep grief with something. But we're not taken by it. We're not just the grief. We can have fear, but I'm not becoming fear. I can have pain, but I'm not the pain. So I can allow myself, and that's why it becomes tricky, because I need to allow myself to expand my heart enough so I can feel everything. So I don't bypass. I don't avoid experience, because if I avoid the pain, I'm going to avoid basically also the high. I'm going to be in that zone where I cannot really feel anymore, because my nervous system has been described now very well. Physiology, my nervous system, when it's engaged, can feel everything, but it's not a different system for the joy and the grief. It's a one system that keeps me engaged or not with others. And if I do enough practice, I realize that what happened over the years, that I'm able to sit with, like we talked about earlier, unknowingness, even like not knowing what tomorrow might bring. I might be able to sit with hopelessness, which might seem very difficult to sit in peace with it. But which means that if I can really do that in my practice, I'm going to be able to hold that space with someone else, not through my words only, but through my presence, through an embodied nervous system and body that's basically resonating that vibration or that frequency or whatever we call it, a nervous system that is at peace. That the less anxious person in the room should be you if you do a good practice. We say always the less anxious, not no anxiety, That's the healer in the room. That's the person that can hold that space. And we all have that capacity. It's not something that, in a healer, I don't really like that term anyway, that carries, but it's anyone that can hold that space for someone that has pain, that has trauma, that is going through something difficult. It's not telling them, reach out to bliss and you just love and you just light, because that's not going to help anyone there. It's how can we be with that and still see that we are much more than that? Still see all of it. And how do we hold it together with others? How do we stay connected? Trauma is a very system approach thing. You cannot really resolve trauma as an individual if you don't approach the system you're in, either being your family or very often your family or your friends or people that you're very connected to, because trauma moves around. That's the funny thing about trauma. But in shamanic work, in shamanic practices, that the way it's always looked at trauma. It's not seen as something you carry. It's more seen almost like an entity or little person that can move around between different people. And the most sensitive person usually in the group is the one that is going to experience the most because they are the recipients of it. But if others are there and present and can hold that space for them, people can heal faster than doing it on their own, which tribes have done for eons.
Yeah.
If they live in close community in tribes, that's why they have way less trauma when they can keep their way of life, because they have a way when someone is going through trauma or a difficult experience to heal that. Very different than the way we're doing in the West. Very different that we approach it.
Yeah, and there's a couple things just in what you've been talking about for the last few minutes I wanted to respond a little to in terms of our own background. And one is I really like the formulation that you put forward of the relationship between practice, as in like an interior practice, and the what it's for. And the analogy that comes to mind for me is like learning a musical instrument, where you do periods of practice, but that's different from actually spontaneously playing and performing in a situation that involves other people. And
yes.
And the way that you're describing that is a good reminder that the aim of the practice is not just to become this dot somewhere, but to actually re-engage in life and be connected with people and to bring a certain kind of presence, as you described, you're able to hold a certain kind of space so that that can be of benefit and of a support for people as they continue to live their lives. So that's
yes,
definitely one thing we appreciate. The other element of that I also just wanted to speak to is like in our own tradition, which bears some resemblance to the fourth way work of Gurdjieff. Our own teacher was very big on the concern that interior practices imported from the West, from the East into a Western society, do have the risk of really creating more isolation and more sort of self-absorption. And he devised a number of practices we call co-meditation, in which you're really systematically putting attention on other people. And that the aim of that was that for a Westerner, the shock is to actually put full attention on another. It's easy for us because we're so self-absorbed to put our attention on ourselves, but for the transformative moment is like when you truly put attention on someone else and take that attention off of your self-concern, like you were describing. That is profoundly revelatory in a way that individual meditation, not to diminish that, but individual meditation may not be a complete picture. So
yeah, I fully resonate with what you just said. Love Gurdjieff, by the way. I studied a little bit and really love his teachings. But to me, it's because we've learned, I've wrote recently about it, but we learn so much the way of ownership, which is a way of separation. What I have, what you don't have. I have a diploma, I've come from this family, I own this is what I have my bank account, this is the cars I have, this is the brand, this is whatever. In traditional system, it's not about ownership. Even the land, you don't own the land. You're in a relationship with it. It's all about relationship. And to me, it's how do we move the collective from a mindset, which is a mindset of ownership, to a mindset of relationship. Because either we want it or not, we are in a relationship. We're in a relationship with this earth, we're in a relationship with each other, and we're only going to make it together or we're not going to make it. To me, it's plain simple. It's very obvious when I look at the world and what's going on. So when we take this practice, very often it becomes ownership. Oh, I have this certificate. I went to this training. I've got this yoga certification. I've got this and that and this and that. The question is always to bring back, and that's probably one of the most important questions, is who is it for? When I'm doing a session or I'm doing a ceremony or something like that, who is it for?
And if as therapists, if as people that help others, and however we define ourselves, we can always answer very clearly that question. Like we 100% we know, even if we give a massage, it's not for me. And in the world of trauma, I've trained in trauma a lot recently, and I'm doing a lot of work with sexual trauma, which is a delicate trauma. It's difficult because nervous system is very often shut down, and that you need always to make sure that whatever you do is the person's desire, what people want, what people ask for, and you're not putting on them a treatment. You're not putting on them. It's something that's co-created. And I think that's what shifted a lot the way also I look at healing 10 years ago, 5 years, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, to the way I look at it now. What to me now, it's a co-creation. Yes, I have tools that I've learned. I can use singing bowls, I can use a drum, I can use my voice. But at the end of the day is, you are your own healer, talking to the person that's there. You have the power. I'm not here to fix you. And the only way for that person to feel that is if they are co-creating the healing experience with you. So they find their own power within themselves. Because if not, they become addicted to the healer, to the guru, to the teacher, to the workshop, to the retreat, to the plant medicine, to whatever works for them. And then we're going just to have a great experience. And we feel really good about it, and then we come back, and we don't have that effect anymore because it was something that's coming from outside inside of us, not something that's revealed from inside of us. And there's beautiful retreats and people that work that way, more and more. But I think it's very always important to say, okay, is it something I'm going, for? Am I in a relationship here? Who is it really for? And am I empowering you to find your own way through this darkness, through whatever you're going through? Or am I coming with solutions and telling you this is what you have to do? Because if I do that, I'm just doing the same thing school system and education in the Western world I've done to people for now hundreds of years.
Yeah, well, we're at a good point to take a break for the show, so
we'll get back to this discussion of shamanism and healing, the various healing techniques and the goals therein. So we'll do a couple to more.
Yeah, so we'll do a couple of announcements. I'm going to turn you over to Rob on the phone. You'll be off the air, and then we'll rejoin in probably about 6 or 7 minutes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
See you soon.
We'll return to our show after a short musical break. Musical interludes on this show are from a CD called The Lute in Dance and Dream, Masterpieces for Lute from the 16th to 18th centuries, performed by Lutz Kirchhoff on Renaissance and Baroque lutes. This piece is a prelude and chaconne by Charles Mouton.